The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website at jonathanfoust.com. While you're there, you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. Thank you, and enjoy. So when you practice self-observation without judgment, or mindfulness, as I like to say, you become aware of all the different somethings going on inside. This last couple days, the wind was really intense. It was like 30-mile-an-hour winds with up to 40-mile-an-hour gusts. And the other morning, I got up before sunrise to go down to the river. I live on a private drive. It's about a half a mile. And there's all this wood down. So I would sort of drive and then walk ahead and clear the road for about 50 feet, and then drive and then clear the road. And kind of felt, it felt good to be, clearing the road for my neighbors. But at some point I thought, boy, I hope one of the neighbors sees me serving so selflessly. There was something that was responding to what needed to be done, and there was something inside that wanted to be noticed. So this talk is on how to work with inner conflict. And I was a little bit, thinking about this talk, thinking, should I do something really autobiographical, or stories from kind of classic Dharma, or maybe find something kind of current that would be really dramatic to talk about, we could all relate to. And I realized I was completely in inner conflict on how to do the talk. So my intention always is to offer talks that are really pragmatic, that kind of explore these perennial teachings, but then to really explore how do you apply it in real time in your life. And I hope that this might be helpful. I'll be touching on a few elements and leading a few key experiences that have been helpful for me. When you go through any day, if you think about even today, how many choices did you have to make today? And how many of those choices are kind of like from below the surface? If you wake up in the morning, well, what'll I have for breakfast? Well, there might be something in the side saying, I'd really like chocolate ice cream with 3 espressos, And there's something thinking, maybe not. Might be not that skillful. But those impulses are there. We have all these impulses that are kind of below the line of what we're aware of that are always playing through us. And it's a question of really assessing at any given moment what's happening and then how to be with it. And sometimes it gets very complex. So I'd like to talk about how life is fundamentally driven by desire, and how the nature of conflict is entertaining 2 or 3 or 4 competing desires in direct conflict with each other. And how stepping back and contemplating cause and effect can be very helpful and can bring a lot of clarity. And also how opening the frame of your awareness can help you shift when you're working with a conflict. I was thinking about this talk. I suddenly remembered someone from the ashram, a good friend. I'll call him Rajiv, mostly because that was actually his name. He was really into optimal health, and I don't think he'd disagree that he was rather fastidious, and to tell the truth, paranoid about his health. And when our community went through a huge upheaval and a lot of us had to leave because of all those changes, he suddenly got very excited about acupuncture school. And I remember him saying, hey, there's this acupuncturist I talked to. He makes $85,000 a year part-time. He's very, very excited about that. And then a friend of him asked him, are you sure you want to be around sick people all day? And then his response was, ew, I don't want to do that. I think we all have these fantasies about things we want to do, and then we're sort of struck by the reality of it. But it's desire that sets the whole wheel in motion. According to sort of Buddhist cosmology, it's desire that sets up the whole chain of our whole life experience. And if you don't examine your desires, they can get you into trouble. So there's something I've talked about before, but I've always found it helpful. And it's the teaching on the 8 worldly winds. As you're kind of on this tightrope of life, there are these 8 winds that are constantly knocking you off balance. And they're all about desire. First is the desire for. You have a desire for pleasure that drives your life. You have a desire for gain, to win. You have a desire for fame, like to be well liked. And you have a desire for praise, to hear how great you are. There are also things that we really want to avoid, which are actually the desire of the absence of 4 things. It's the desire to avoid all pain in your life, the desire to avoid loss, the desire to avoid blame, and the desire to avoid shame. These are incredibly powerful forces. They're forces that can motivate you, and they're forces that can really hold you in check in life. As I've mentioned before, I've met many unbelievably successful people who were utterly consumed by the desire to avoid failure. They live in that chronic state of anxiety about that. So, of course, these forces kind of drive our culture. They drive advertising. People are very, very good at manipulating other people through these desires. If you buy this toothpaste, you'll be attractive and you'll avoid rejection. It's there. So the interesting thing is that when you again begin to practice self-observation without judgment, or non-judging awareness or mindfulness, you begin to see these desires. You begin to see how they play through, and you begin to see the mechanism of all of your conditioning that comes out of these inborn desires. And the good news is you can actually get free in the midst of those desires. As I think I mentioned last week, that you could say that enlightenment is the absence of desire. In any given moment, when you're not wanting anything other than what's here, that's a profound state of presence. So what happens is, when you're in conflict, one way to look at it is you're entertaining competing desires. I was in a deep conversation and an exploration with someone recently. And he had a very, very challenging relationship with his mother. His mother was really kind of psychologically not well. And she had alienated everyone in the whole family. She was living alone, very needy, very manipulative. And he was really hooked in with her. Like, he was the one who could talk to her. He was the one she trusted. But at the same time, she would also pour all of her manipulation into him. And he felt incredibly guilty about her living alone. But he also spent an inordinate amount of time trying to make her happy and feeling miserable in the process. So a huge conflict began to emerge because he and his partner were expecting a child. And his partner knew how toxic the relationship was. And while his partner was compassionate, his partner wanted nothing to do with her and was very protective about their child and the effect that she might have on the child. So he was stuck, really stuck. And you can sense the conflict here. There was something inside that felt responsible for his mother. There was something inside that felt utterly violated and unhealthy about being around her. Something inside absolutely wanted to honor his partner and protect his family from the damage that she could do. And what to do? If you think about times in your life when you're really caught in conflict, it's exhausting. It is utterly exhausting. It can feel depleting, it can feel frustrating, and it can feel paralyzing. And that was pretty much how he felt. And so there were desires that informed his experience. He had a desire to do right by his mother, a desire to do right toward his partner, a desire to do right by his child, and a desire just to get away from his mother. And so it's an interesting thing. If you look at these desires, they really can have a very wholesome quality. When you really break down any conflict that you're in and look closely at the desires, he really had a desire to take the high road. He wanted to make the decisions that would best serve everyone. So we did an exploration of this. And as I've talked a lot in the past, how your issues are in your tissues. And we really explored how carrying this conflict felt on the inside. And he realized how utterly exhausted he was. Deeply, deeply exhausted from carrying this so much. And through that very deep listening and calming and sensing, there were some action steps that began to emerge. And he realized that his first priority had to be self-care. He had gotten depleted and he'd gotten utterly run down. He realized that in order to deal with all the conflict going on in his life, he actually needed to be at the very top form. And he was running on vapors. His cup really needed to be full. And he realized what he had to do was to set some clear boundaries with his mother that would honor his family. But he also needed to clarify things with his partner to figure out how they were going to handle it together. And what was interesting in that little investigation that we did was that the very first thing that came to him was the need for self-care. And I think it's so important to acknowledge how when you're caught in conflict or you know of someone who's sort of in that exhausting, paralyzing place of conflict, there's such deprivation of energy. There's a really interesting thing, a recent study on sleep and sleep deprivation. When they've done all these test cases where they systematically cut back on people's sleep, when they do all this cognitive testing, the people taking the tests say they're fine. They think they're thinking clearly, but it's very clear in the test that their cognitive function is dramatically impaired. So you think you're fine, you assume everything's okay, but you're really not seeing clearly. So when your cup is empty and you're still entertaining conflicts in your life, it's so important to fill your cup, whatever that may mean for you. Anytime we're in conflict and we're sort of stuck in that cycle of paralysis, it's like we're doing the same thing, hoping for a different result. But something has to change. And so, as in all these practices, we talk about the backward step. Just really stepping back to look closely at what exactly is going on here. Is there a way I can be with it that's both wise and compassionate at the same time? And for him, it was very, very helpful to really see clearly kind of the damage that he was doing to himself by not responding in a different way. But also how that lack of clarity wasn't helping anyone at all. So setting clear boundaries, but also enrolling his partner to help solve the problem was the beginning steps for him to work his way out of that piece. A very helpful way to explore conflict, too, is to contemplate cause and effect. That is to look at the karma of the decisions you might have to make. And there's a really cool process that I'd like to share with you. And it goes back to something Einstein said a long time ago. He said that no problem was ever solved in the same consciousness that created it. So a good friend called me. This was a couple months ago. He was going through a wretched divorce, horrible divorce. And he was at peak frustration. His ex kept making more demands as they were moving toward completion on their divorce. And he would capitulate, hoping they'd get through the next thing, but it was just one more demand and one more demand and one more demand. They tried mediation, and that didn't work. So now it was up to the judge. It was costing him a huge amount of money. There was one more demand that was made that to him was so outrageous. And he said, I just want to shut her down, and something in me just wants to punish her. He was really, really angry. So I asked him if he'd be willing to do an experiment. And I'll guide you through this. It's pretty cool. And I'll give you just the summary and the story, and then I'll take you through the steps. So we're on the phone, and I said, well, would you mind just taking like 3 or 4 minutes to try something? And he goes, sure. I'm utterly at a loss. So I asked him just to put his hand on his heart. He's not a put your hand on your heart kind of guy. But he was desperate enough that he actually did it, or at least he told me he did it. And I said, tell me about something you're grateful for. And there was a long pause, because he was really wound up. And he said, I'm so grateful that my kids are available, and they're really, really good kids. I'm really, really grateful for my kids. So I had him kind of hang out there. I said, so when you think about that, where do you feel that? He said, well, I can feel kind of a warmth in my heart. And he described, how that felt. I said, good. I said, is your hand still on your heart? He said, yeah. I said, well, tell me about something else that you're grateful for, that you appreciate. It's kind of another long pause. He said, I love my work. I just love my work. It's so creative. I love the people I work with. I said, well, kind of breathe into that and tell me, where do you feel that on the inside? He goes, well, I can kind of feel that in my throat and in my belly. So we hung out there for a little while. And I said, well, is your hand still on your heart? He goes, yes. Well, tell me about one more thing that you're grateful for? And he went, geez. And he goes, well, okay. He was like, I'm in a relationship that has been my dream. I just can't believe how lucky I am to be with this person, and I'm so grateful. So I asked him to take some breaths, and where do you feel that? And they felt that in his belly and all through his body, and percolating, tingling, and all that stuff. And I said, okay, go back to where you are now in this divorce process and just complete the following phrase. All I need to remember is. And there's a long pause, and he said, oh, screw you. He said, she's hurting, and she's really scared. I really need to be generous. Boom. When you're in conflict, quite often you're in your mind. And that's only one little part of you. The heart is a whole other part of you. And when you can align the heart with the head, it's a different reality. So there are many approaches to this balance of heart and mind. These are the two wings of mindfulness practice. Wisdom, seeing clearly, compassion, finding a way to be with it. So lots of different techniques, but I'd like to share with you this process from one of my esteemed teachers, Sri Tony Robbins Das. He actually has this really beautiful process. They're really, really sweet. You've done all these studies of how much the heart can affect the brain. That when you bring your heart in alignment with the brain, how conflicts sometimes can get resolved more clearly. So, willing to give it a shot? First of all, does anyone have any conflicts you can think of? If not, you can make one up. So if you like, you can close your eyes. And take a moment just to go through the files and just to kind of reflect on a conflict that is present for you right now. And again, you can think of this conflict as their competing desires. If you need more time, raise your hand up high. Okay. So again, take a little while just to bring into mind a conflict. And seriously, if you can't think of one, you can make one up, just to try on this little technology. Then again, if you need more time, you can raise your hand. Okay, so if you wouldn't mind, no one's watching, you can bring your hands to your heart. And take a moment just to deepen your breath. And as you deepen your breath, can you feel your heart? Can you feel this whole part of your body? And as you reflect on this conflict, take a moment to recall any visual information that you can recreate right now. Do you see this as a moving image or a still image? Can you turn up the colors a little bit, or the contrast? When you think about this issue, is there anything auditory that you can recall? Any words or tone of voice, any sounds? And take a moment just to sort of sense on the inside, when you think about this issue, what does it feel like? Can you locate that on the inside? So this will take just a few minutes. Let your breath be slow and full and deep, and really just sense your hand here in the heart. And if you would, think of something you're grateful for in your life. Just one thing you're grateful for. And breathe. Where do you feel that? And bring into mind, is there something else that you can think of right now that you are really grateful for in your life, something you appreciate? And now bringing into mind a third thing that you feel grateful for. Just something in your life that you appreciate. And as you breathe, just take a moment just to sense, how do you smile when you're grateful? What is the look in your eye when you're grateful and you appreciate? And take 3 more breaths. Just reflecting how gratitude and appreciation flows, how blessed you are to have this experience. And now, if you would, bring your attention back to this unfinished business, back to this conflict, and let yourself just spontaneously complete the following phrase. All I need to remember is, or all I need to focus on is. And then if you'd like, you can lower your hand. And if you'd like, you can open your eyes, or you can remain with them closed. So was that helpful? Anyone feel worse? I hope not. There's something so powerful about the alchemy of gratitude. It helps us to move from this kind of small place to a more expansive place. And when your consciousness shifts, you can begin to see through different lenses. So this sense of opening the frame when you're in conflict can be so helpful. Moving from a narrow focus to a wider focus, a more open focus. A good friend of mine who's since passed on was a therapist her whole life, and in her office, opposite of where her clients would sit, she had this huge poster of Earth from outer space. And quite often, as she would listen to someone's problem, she would just invite them to take a look at the poster, just to sort of reflect on that. And then they would start to explore possible solutions. So that remembering of how big the frame is can be so helpful. As one poet put it really well, he said, sometimes you have to take the 3,000-year view. That totally reframes my issues in a pretty big way. A good friend had been struggling in his business for a long time. he never had quite enough to push it over the top to the next level and make it really lucrative. There was always the potential of a breakthrough, of getting some major investing or major funding. But it would just come in bits and pieces. It would kind of keep him alive, but it never broke through to the big one. He really loved what he did, but the stress of trying to keep this company going was really wearing him down. So his conflict was, do I pull the plug or do I keep going? So opening up the frame can be very helpful. And the classic practice is the rocking chair test, if you're not familiar with that. You're 102 years old, sitting on your rocker, looking back on your life. What was most important? So the other way of looking at this is in terms of cause and effect, or karma. So we did a little exploration, and I asked him, well, so here's this conflict, what are your options? And he said, well, option number one is just pull the plug, let all the investors who've taken me this far, let them know I couldn't do it. My second option is to just run down all the cash I have and keep these really good employees employed as long as I can, so I can support them and help them kind of move on. And my third option is keep going and just keep pounding the bushes and see if I can get in front of more people and keep the inflow going so I can continue to grow it. So we explored this. And again, if you just hang out in your head, you'll have some options. If you bring it into your heart, it opens up the field in a really powerful way. But you can also explore it in the body, because the body doesn't lie. The feedback you get from the body doesn't lie. And so we not only explored the idea of these options, but really how it felt on the inside. And so as we went through each of these options, he described what it would feel like if he just pulled the plug, what it would feel like if he just sort of ran it out, and what it would feel like if he pushed on. And after some exploration of really investigating how all of this kind of lived on the inside, how these issues were in his tissues, at some point he said, really, there's no choice here. I have to keep going. I couldn't live with myself if I stopped. So we talked more about that, and again, sort of reflecting on how it felt, and he committed to another 6 months. And in that 6 months, it kind of gave him a surge of power to kind of keep on going. I'm looking at the time, gauging whether we have time for another little reflection or not. I'm thinking we don't. But you might, we'll try it at the end. So back to the analogy that I use all the time from Joseph Campbell. And there's a big circle, there's a line through it. Above the line is what you're aware of. Below the line is what you're not aware of. If you don't look below the line, if you don't relax and pay attention, those forces that are unseen and unfelt are going to run you. And conflict is actually an invitation to really lower the line. If you try to think your way through conflict, you're only going to go so far. But if you draw on your heart if you draw on your body, and if you really draw on your sincere desire to take the high road, to really do the right thing for everybody, you may not get crystal clarity all the time, but you'll definitely learn more about yourself. You'll learn more about the deepest desires that inform your life. And to my mind, the deepest desire we all have is a desire to be free, a desire to be truly happy. So when you find yourself in conflict, notice your relationship to it. You can look at how to reframe it, how to look closer at the desires that are really driving you. Gratitude can make a big difference. Taking the time to really sense how those issues really live on the inside can show you some possibilities where they may not have existed before. Why don't we take a few minutes, a little reflection before we close. If you like, you can slow down your breath. And let yourself just soften and relax on the breath moving out. Your life is informed by desire. You might take a few moments and just to explore the following question. What is your experience right now in the absence of desire? We'll close with this poem from Mary Oliver that speaks about that which motivates and moves us forward in life. It's entitled The Journey. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice. Though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles. Mend my life, each voice cried. But you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough, and a wild night and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. In these final moments, you might again bring your attention to something for which you feel gratitude and appreciation. And as you deepen your breath, just sense if you can allow that feeling inside to get big. And in your own way, to wish yourself well on your journey. To bring into mind those in your inner circle, to wish them well. And let that feeling radiate out in all directions to all beings without discrimination. May all beings feel free. May all beings feel happy. May all beings know peace. And gently deepening your breath. And as you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I got an email from a friend, Marjorie, in New Hampshire, and she said that in her meditation group in a Unitarian church in New Hampshire, that they were listening to one of my talks. And at the end, it said, "And there's tea and cookies out in the lobby." She said everyone sat up and started smiling. She was like, "Oh no." So if you're listening to this online, there are no tea and cookies, but if you're here, there are definitely tea and cookies. So take your inner conflict out there, see what happens. And thank you so much for coming.